Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? So let me just make sure you've got the screen in front of you. I'm just dealing with the technology. Thanks for your patience. And let me introduce myself. I'm Paul Horrocks. I lead the Private Finance Sustainable Development team at the OECD. And thanks for the opportunity to speak about our work here at the OECD and all the elements that we're developing. So this is a bit of an overview of the work on blended finance. I don't know if there's anything that we want to say at this stage about questions, if you wanted to ask any specific elements on the run of show, but we basically got 2 hours, so I hope this can be interactive and that you've got, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to stop me, ask me to clarify things, and I'm happy to do that. So just to make that point clear. So just to give you a bit more background, I can see you all join the call now. So I'm Paul Horrocks. I lead the Private Finance Sustainable Development team here at the OECD in the Development Cooperation Directorate, and we've been working on blended finance for a number of years now in response to the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, as well as the upcoming FFD4 discussions that are very much around mobilization. So I think it's really timely that we've got this session, that we have this discussion, and I hope that it's very useful for you and informative, and that we have a dialogue. So again, I just encourage you to be participatory, to ask questions when you want, and sort of ask me to clarify things if they're not clear. So I'm just going to make sure my screen is working. So can you see that?
Yes, it's working very well. Yeah, thank you, Paul. And just to say hi and welcome to everyone. Now we have 25 people that has joined, so I guess that we can start. As you all know, this is the second online session that is preparatory for the in-person training that is happening in a couple of weeks in Paris. So we will be happy to welcome you here. So Paul will be here as well. So this is a first opportunity to get in touch with him, but you also have the opportunity to exchange in person for those that are coming, of course. So we had a first online session as well, preparatory, to make sure that you all participants has the same ground level of information on the renewable energies that are going to be discussed during the training week. It was with Laurent. We have already shared with you the training recording and also the presentation. So if you haven't received, please do let us know. And if you couldn't join this first online session, so you can take the look at the recording. And today is the second and final preparatory session, and I give the floor to Paul now. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks for that, Tuana, and thanks again for the invitation. And I hope always these things are dependent on technology, but also your participation. And thanks to AFD for hosting this and inviting the OECD to participate in this training. So again, I think it is very timely. I'm just struggling to move my slides along. So let me just see if I can make sure that I've got it right. So just bear with me a sec. So I'm going to share my screen again, and then make sure that you can all see, because I want you to be able to have clarity on the presentation, because that's what I want to have a bit more context, and hopefully a lot of it will be explained in that. So bear with me.
Yes, sure, no problem. In the meanwhile, if there is anyone that has any questions about the in-person training happening in Paris, regarding anything, accommodation, regarding the field visit. It's now not a surprise anymore. So you could see, we just sent you the invitation this week. That is to the green hydrogen project. So we prepare it very well for you, and we hope that you will enjoy it.
I'm still having a bit of an issue in trying to share my screen, Tawana. Let me just, yeah, it doesn't, I had it, but I couldn't move it. There we go. Maybe that will hopefully works now. And apologies for that. Is that working? Okay. Yeah. Can you all see it? Let me know.
Not yet. It's not moving yet. Maybe try to.
Is that working now?
No, we are still at the second slide, mobilizing finance for sustainable development. It was moving though before.
Apologies for this.
Don't worry.
Maybe Tawana, can I ask you to share?
Yeah, sure. You can send me over the presentation so I can share.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. And apologies for the slight delay, colleagues. And I'll just send it over. It's a bit of a sizable one, so I hope you managed to receive it in time. And just to say that, I mean, I've got a lot of data in here, so it might speak to some of the topics that you're interested in and projects that you're working on. So and if there's any need for clarification, then I'm happy. I mean, just to explain to you a bit about what blended finance is, because there's sometimes some confusion about that. And so we have quite a broad definition at the OECD, and it is sort of mainstreaming at the moment. We also refer to blending finance as mobilizing development finance and private finance for sustainable development. So we have quite a sort of wider definition than others in this space. Why do we do that? Because we're the OECD, and we want to use as much development capacity and institutions as possible. So that's a bit of the rationale for the definition. But you'll see from my slides shortly that the further sort of clarification around the use of the OECD definition that we use as well for accounting for the data and also for setting our policy settings. So I'm also pleased to tell you that the DAC has just agreed to have update our OECD DAC blended finance guidance. So we'll be launching that at Seville next week with a sort of small pamphlet and some background on our guidance, which I think will be very useful for you to see. And I'll talk through that a bit as well in this presentation, all the work we've done around guidance. So just to sort of highlight that and the other elements of the work that we're doing. So we've also currently doing quite a lot of work on bonds. So I'll explain a bit about the role of blended finance and GSSS bonds. So green, social, sustainable, and sustainability linked bonds. So that's been some of the issue around blended finance, that it hasn't delivered at the scale that was required. So we at the OECD consider that bonds are quite a good instrument in order to scale up significantly blended finance, as they're typically a bond is liquid. It's something that institutional investors have. And I mean, lots of bond issuances normally are above the sort of 500 million. So, but we have seen smaller scale bonds. I mean, we've got one that we like and that we feature a lot in our policies in Rwanda, which was 20 million. And now it's helping the Rwanda DFI. So there's lots of, I think, instruments out there that we're seeing, but we sort of have picked up on a few that we think can help with the scaling agenda. So yeah, I don't know if you can see what I've sent to you, to Anna, if you've got it available.
I didn't receive now, but I can share the one that you sent it over during the week, if that's fine.
That's fine. Yeah, just share that one. Thanks very much. I see there's 26 of us in the room. Ah, there we are. Fantastic. Thanks for that. So if we could go to the next slide, and no, that's the last one. Just that, the next and next. Yeah. So if we could scale this up a bit. So this is a bit of where we are currently. So what we want to try and do is essentially move private investors away from traditional investments into more development focused investments. And at the moment, we're trying to sort of move from low and middle income countries into low income countries. So that's where a lot of the bilateral providers are providing grants and aid, but we want to try and move these private flows to those low income countries, to LDCs. So shifting, and we consider that blended finance is an important tool in that shift. As we transition economies towards sustainability, there's going to be a massive need to use de-risking tools, use some of the GSSS bonds that I've spoken about. So bilateral providers are cutting back. We've seen lots of cuts in aid recently. Multilateral providers like the MDBs are going to have their balance sheet stretched. So we really need to think a bit about how the private sector can come in at scale and not only go into those sectors, but also into sectors that we consider vitally important for sustainable development. So what am I talking about here? So renewable energy, women entrepreneurs, leaving no one behind. So giving access to funding to small scale businesses, etc. So the list is long. The needs are massive. We all know that the SDGs aren't being delivered upon despite commitments. We all know that to reach the Paris goals and our nationally determined contributions, we're going to need a lot of money. And where's this going to come from? I mean, at the moment, governments are fiscally constrained. So blended finance is an important tool. If we can go to the next slide, please, Tiwana. Next slide.
Tawana, Tawana, you're sharing the wrong screen, actually. This is why it cannot move.
Is this the right one now?
Yes, no. Thank you. I mean, that's the slide I want to talk to. If you can get it in sort of display mode, you still got the sort of my notes at the bottom and the column on the left, but that's fine as well, if as long as people can see it. So this is what we're trying to do at the OECD through our policies and approaches through the Development Assistance Committee, but also recognizing the OECD has a lot of engagement with developing countries and also has a lot of countries with lots of assets under management that aren't achieving much in terms of return. So you see the bubbles there. Those bubbles all represent different pools of capital. They've all got different risk return profiles in them. So you've got institutional investors, you've got retail investors, you've got commercial banks, and all those actors are required to be mobilized. So we want to use blended finance, essentially to mobilize different sources, and depending on the source, we will determine the sort of concessionality, the type that of blend that we use. In order to do that, we need this piece in the middle. You can see with the arrows all coming together, alignment. So that means that you've got to sort of direct that funding towards development and make sure that there's a sort of organization between that funding, so that there's a directed towards supporting development and development impact, which is the final one, which represents the SDGs. So addressing the SDGs, mobilizing with blended finance and directing the funds to where they're needed is the big agenda. And we will be all stepping up and focusing on this increasingly going forward. If we can go to the next slide, Tawana. Yeah, great. Yeah, no, keep going down. Yeah, okay. So the explanation of blended finance here, I gave you a bit of a sort of overview before, but it is really about mobilizing different sources. So commercial, it includes public and private. Why do we have public money that we're trying to mobilize? Well, because a lot of the funds that sit in your pensions, to sit in the pension funds in developing countries or in OECD countries, have got a commercial mandate, so they need to make commercial returns. But it could be public money. It can be doctors, pensions, police, public sector workers, and others that are working towards their retirement but want to align with development goals. So we also want to mobilize those. We've seen that in Denmark happening with the SDG fund, which has been very effective in terms of mobilizing money, Danish pension money. So we use the money to mobilize, and we basically have this other box with the blended finance, the transaction approaches and the structures there. So, and I'll explain a bit what we see in terms of instruments and structures. And then that's the use of the finance. So you can see on the right, the blended finance is basically the strategic use of development finance for the mobilization of additional finance towards sustainable development in developing countries. We have a different definition than say the DFIs. They tend to focus just on the concessional blended finance. Why do we have this broader definition? Because we consider that the DFIs have already been collateralized, have been received equity, and their job is to work and mobilize the private sector. So we consider it both concessional and non-concessional is part of the blending, and that DFIs should be blending their concessional and non-concessional in order to mobilize the private sector. So next slide, please. So these are the structures, a bit that we've seen in the previous graph. So on the structures, you can see we think a bit about risk transfer mechanisms, securitization, reinsurance, mobilization across those balance sheets. And then on the left, you see some of the instruments. So that deals with credit lines, bonds, collective investment vehicles, loans. Those are all debt type of instruments. And then we have shares in companies, and collective investment vehicles that have a number of shares in them and equity, and they invest, take investment in developing country companies. On the right, you can see other types of instruments that we've seen that have got particular interest at the moment. So guarantees, insurance, and that's a sort of hedging political risk. So guarantee around change of government or policy. Hedging is basically dealing with your foreign exchange. And then we've still got a lot of grants. So grants are really important still in blended finance, because a lot of funds have got, say, a grant element to prepare the ground, to provide training, to build capacity, to address viability gap between the ability for a project to be bankable and for a project to be able to go forward. So you might need that gap to be filled by grant funding. So it's critically important. I don't know if there's any questions to that. I mean, raise your hand, turn on your screen. Happy to sort of expand on that if it's not clear. And I'm also happy to hear any remarks on things that you think we should improve upon in this presentation in preparation for the real deal in Paris. So next slide, Tawana, please. So this is a bit where we've seen the mobilization effort. So our figures go to 2023, and 70 billion was the last figure. So you see that all stacking up. I mean, we've revised it up, so it's around. It says 67, but the official figure now is 70. What you see at the bottom are DAC countries. So those are the bilateral DFIs. They've remained relatively flat. The orange you can see increasing dramatically. Those are the MDBs. So they have grown enormously in terms of how much they're mobilizing, how big the impact is on the market, the role that they're playing. Where you see the line at the top, that's official development assistance. So that's the ODA that we will have seen cut, that is being cut. So there's a sort of downward trend on the ODA at about 212 billion in 2023. But we know that that's being reduced thanks to USAID cuts, as well as the UK and others. So mobilization now is becoming a more and more important tool in the development toolbox, but we still haven't delivered on the volumes. We still haven't taken as much exposure to projects as we would like, I think. And I believe that this agenda is growing and becoming more relevant to development in developing countries, but also in donor countries. Next slide, please. So this is a bit in terms of the mechanisms that we've managed to mobilize. So on the left, the top corner, you can see that we've sort of had guarantees have been growing overall in terms of use, thanks to the fact that they're very efficient. The private sector likes them and they can be very cost effective. Where we've seen a bit of reduction is the direct investment in companies, so special purpose vehicles, which is the sort of lighter orange. And then we've seen a bit by distribution by income group. We've seen bilaterals playing a big role in upper middle income countries compared to multilaterals. And we still see this LDCs across all of them at quite a low 12%. The big kind of mobilizers were in the sort of upper middle, Brazil and India. You can see that in the bar at the bottom. We had a big gas project in Mozambique, which kind of pushed that country up into the mobilization quite significantly. But we would like to see a lot more mobilization taking place in sub-Saharan Africa, and at greater scale and to the sectors that are relevant. So that's what we're trying to do with our blended finance guidance as well, is to improve that, to help you do better, to help the market do better, and to have more private investors, actors interested in working with the development finance community to achieve that. Next slide. Thank you. So this is the sort of overview of the providers. You can see that the multilateral providers are, the stick out is IFC. I mean, it's quite significant in terms of the difference in setting the market. The EU institutions, there are these funds that are being established, like the GCF, the GEF, that are playing increasing roles. And we can see some, I mean, MEGA, of course, is all about guarantees. So they're predominantly in that space. I think we probably see in the future the more use of guarantees, as they're quite effective, as I've said before, going forward. So that's a bit of a picture of who the players are. Next slide, please. And this is in terms of those by bilateral DFIs. So you know that the US has the DFC. We'll see what shape that takes, where it goes. Proparco is very big up there as well. So it sits in the AFD and is a big focus of the AFD group. They also benefit from sitting with the AFD and getting funding through the AFD issuing bonds into the market, green, social and sustainable bonds, I would say as well. So and then you've got BII that's a bit more equity focused, that doesn't have so much, doesn't have any capacity actually to raise capital in the market, and therefore has got a slightly different balance sheet. Bilateral providers, the US, I mean, I don't know if this is going to change, and then France. That's the sort of, but we're seeing this change quite significantly, I think, over the years, and this will, of course, move depending on how we see DFIs developing, seeing how the US takes on this agenda. So next slide, please. This is the provider agency. So you might think, oh, okay, there's only DFIs in this place, but that's not the case. RFD does quite a lot. As you can see, it does guarantees itself. USAID has been in this space and worked with CEDA before. And there's a number of agencies that do work on mobilization. So, I mean, they're relatively small amounts compared to the global figure, but they often can take more risk. They can often do it with their grants, and they can sometimes sort of look at the sectors that DFIs wouldn't traditionally look at. So important players in this space. Next slide, please. So this is a bit of an overview of how development actors are working. So this, I mean, traditionally you've got the donor government with the ministry, and that will work sometimes directly with an MDB, and then it might have other programs that it does with its bilateral DFI, and there you get the commercial investors coming. You might not have a bilateral DFI, as you see on the right. So that means you just go directly with a project company. You can fund that, or through the MDB. So and then in the middle, you've got like a development bank. So it could be KfW that goes through DEG and then works with the MDB, and then you have commercial. This all creates different environments because you have different tranching of the debt and investments or the equity. So you might have the bilateral DFI that's sitting above the MDB in terms of risk and earning somewhat higher returns, and the MDB might be more concessional, or you might, sometimes we've seen the reverse actually. So it all depends a bit where you sit in the financing structure, the risk profiles, and the types of investments that you're taking and who you're working with and what their risk return profile is. So that's just another thing to take into consideration. Any questions so far? Any hands raised? Am I being clear? Is this all making sense to you? Let me know. And I'm also happy to take questions. And otherwise, you might get tired of me. So I don't want that to happen. But next slide, please. So this is a bit where we want to move to. So and this was developed a while, this graph. So we had it in our Making Blended Finance work for the SDGs publication, and I think that we've moved things a bit. So this is where public money sits at the moment, in terms of there's way too much public money mobilizing small amounts of private, and there often is a bit of a discussion around ratios. So saying you mobilize 1-7, or it's 1-1 sometimes but it does depend on the context. It does depend on whether you want to create a market, or if you're trying to sort of create a transaction to build market, to build visibility, to create data. Could be something like that you've got solar panels in a sort of small jurisdiction without much private sector, and you want to try and encourage that. So you have a few projects, you build up the pilot, you demonstrate that it's financially viable, you've got some evidence you can take to the financial system and show that it's working, and then you mobilize. So it's often we get it confused with project finance with sort of market building as well. So it's important, but ultimately I think donors and the development finance want to attract a lot more commercial finance. So that means getting institutional investors, that means getting more pension funds, longer term, cheaper capital, into developing countries, including their own local financial system. So attracting their pension systems, instead of them investing in property in Paris, we would like to see them investing in sustainable projects in their own country, for example. So there is a sort of lack of understanding in terms of policy coherence. So we wanted to try and create a common framework, and that's what the OECD is very good at. We create policies, we organize our members, we peer review them. So we wanted to make sure that this can sort of develop in terms of having a clear understanding of the flight of direction of this agenda. There is lack of evidence on data. We've got the GEMS database, but it's not at the granularity, and it's only one piece of the puzzle. So we want to have consistent estimates of blending, understand how effective it is, where, when, how do we blend institutional investors, how do we blend private equity, how do you blend with local currency investors. All these things need to be sort of picked up. At the moment, it's just quite a sort of broad agenda, and we need a much more robust drilling down into evidence in subsectors of themes, regions, but also investors, both local and offshore as well. So I'll pause there. I spent a long time on this graph, and maybe we can go to the next one. Thank you. So yeah, additionality. So what is this sort of we need to make sure that we're additional in all our projects, and that's really important in terms of being in line with the concessionality and character and criteria of ODA. So for it to be ODA eligible according to the private sector instruments rules of the OECD, must be additional financially or value. So what does that mean? Well, financial additionality means that you've got to be able to obtain financing from capital markets for a specific activity at the necessary terms or scale where it mobilizes finance from the private sector that would otherwise, that's the key here, otherwise not have been invested. So it is about being there, not crowding out the private sector, it's crowding in the private sector. You need to think about additionality. So in terms of cases, it needs to be working alongside other actors. It needs to lead to better development outcomes, and those can be through advisory service or other technical assistance. And then you've got to think of the development additionality. So it needs to have occurred without the partnership between the official and the private sector. So it should. Would it not have occurred without that partnership is the critical question you need to ask yourself before you go ahead. Next slide. Thanks. So I've spoken a bit about the case study of Denmark. So this is a bit to give you a bit of more of a context in terms of the Danish DFI, IFU. So they wanted to try and get the Danish pension system involved in the SDGs. So they've developed a framework for assessing and documenting additionality in order to drill this down and have a sort of basis for this work that they do with their pension system. And they've kind of developed this out, and there's a sort of screening process whereby the teams are like to assess and review investment opportunities. So before they propose projects, because IFU, for example, is very much involved in the SDG fund with these pension funds. So they want to have a screening, a proper way of sort of looking at and ensuring additionality. So they've worked on that. If we can go to the next slide. And then BII have got another sort of approach. They use the term contribution. So the investor contribution, that refers to the difference between BII's additional inputs to make a development outcomes. And when making decisions on potential investments, BI will consider in each investment its additionality contribution, whether BI is additional and how much BII's additionality makes or contributes to that development outcome. So every of the DFIs have got different ways of looking at this. They've got frameworks, but they do share these things. There is groups that sort of address this. So next slide. So this is what I've kind of spoken a bit about in the guarantees. Guarantees are really critical, because we also know that there's not going to be a lot more money for development finance. So what do we have that works and what's cost effective? So this is a kind of great report that I point you to. It's sort of the topics are there. I think one of the great things that we should try and focus on is the need for more collaboration, cooperation, and use of the guarantee. So that's a great sort of insight into thinking and using guarantees going forward. So I would encourage you to read that, and you can ask us at the OECD any questions or any clarifications. And we are going to be working again this year on guarantees and producing another report and sort of where we stand now, because I think the conversation, you have become more sophisticated. The market has become more used to guarantees, but there's still not clear guidance on things like transparency around the use of guarantees, what they should essentially do, how they can contribute to development. So that's something that we will cover. Next slide, please. So this is a bit of a definition of the guarantee that the OECD has. We have, it's basically, I mean, according to our, the way that we look at it, it's a sort of insurance type policy protecting banks and investors from risk of non-risk payments. But they do differ according to the type of risk, the nature of the investment, and the coverage. So you can have like 100% guarantee. That changes, for example, a bond totally if you've got 100% guarantee to a partial or 20% coverage. And then also what the guarantee covers. Does it cover the interest or is it the principal? The other thing is that you should recognize is that you've got funded guarantee. So the amount is kept in a sort of escrow account. That's sort of an account earning interest that's hands off, that the money's parked there, so that you know if you're using a guarantee, or if you're the benefit of a guarantee from a donor, that the money is there. That helps in terms of any structuring assessment by rating agencies. But you do also have unfunded guarantees, and only the expected loss is kept in reserve. Some donors, like CEDA, just have a way of looking at unfunded guarantees, so they don't have to lock up the money, and they can use Sweden's AAA rating to on-lend that in the form of a guarantee to projects. And there's an envelope of how much exposure they can take, but that's quite, I think, an important approach to using guarantees, and one that may be expanded upon in the future amongst donors. So watch the space of guarantees. I suspect that we'll see a lot more innovation, and more like the cooperation we've seen between the Nordics around the use of guarantees on IMCA. You can have joint guarantees that improve it and help the credibility of projects. So coming together amongst yourselves is a very strong way to sort of improve the guarantee, share risks and exposure through joint guarantees. I encourage that to hopefully develop further. Next slide, please. So in terms of ODA, we want our donors to be able to get the credit, so when they're using a guarantee, but it needs to be number one. So these are the sort of criteria. So if you want to use a guarantee, it's got to be allocated to the ODA DAC recipient list. It needs to be administered with economic development and welfare as the main objective, and so ECAs are included, additionality in value or both, and of a maturity of more than 1 year. So we don't have sort of encourage short-term guarantees, but longer term. I would add that to be an effective guarantee, you've always got to think about your exit strategy as well. but this is just for the ODA reporting that we now thankfully have included as a measure of the official development assistance, and that you as donors can use guarantees and get the recognition for that in the ODA accounting. Next slide. Benefits and challenges of using guarantees. So I've spoken a bit about their mobilization capacity. You saw that from all the data, all the amounts that they're quite efficiently mobilizing increasingly. They can be additional, very highly flexible. So you can essentially write guarantees for lots of things. They can be optimal in terms of your financial capacity. You can also do domestic resource mobilization by having a guarantee in local currency or targeting local currency finance, and it can help develop the market. And the nice big tick at the bottom, it's ODA eligible. What's tough about these things? They're difficult to structure and get them right. You need to have expertise. There's some disincentives for MDBs in terms of their accounting. There are some constraints, and there's limited awareness of the guarantee. So they're not, as everything in life, they're not sort of perfect, but they're pretty good in terms of the development toolbox. I don't know if there's any questions on guarantees or any clarifications, or if you're using them, or any views on those particular instruments. Let me know, raise your hand, or I will continue with my presentation. Anything to raise? Am I clear? I hope so. Okay. So your silence, I suggest, is endorsement. Let's go to the next slide, please. Oh, here we are. Thanks. So better use of guarantees, incentives, promoting them to ensure accountability, have partial guarantees, thereby you're not sort of over-egging the project and providing too much skin in the game by yourselves. Crowding out, don't give 100% and don't sort of be too generous with the terms of the guarantee. Reassess exit strategy, and sort of bid for the provide a guarantee, but you can go to the market and get a pricing for it. So use competition to improve that you get the best rate for yourselves, and standardize. Everybody sort of complains to us that there's so many different types of contracts or guarantees, which frankly we're not as coordinated as in the blended finance space as we are in official development systems, where there's a whole architecture and there's a lot of organization, it's all scrutinized. In this space where everybody does a bit what they want, and then the market just sort of plays, private sector sort of makes the most of that and moves around the various differences of this. Not that I'm saying that we're all using guarantees, but yeah. The next slide, please. Providers of guarantees, so you can see a bit who the main players are, and we've got Garanco. That's kind of quite a good one because it can provide things in local currency. It's in places like Nigeria. So yeah, there's as I said, there's some activities to work together around guarantees, but hopefully this list will grow. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is a bit of a climate action fund for developing countries. Basically uses guarantees to contribute to unlocking resources. So one to look at, but it can be basically it's an unfunded guarantee of 2.5 billion, and it allows from the donors to allow ADB to use 11.2 to fund climate. So they're kind of developing this fund with a guarantee component, and it combines with 1 billion concessional finance in support of projects by this IFCAP guarantee, and the total sort of envelope is 12.2.5 billion. So, Tawana, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, I saw that there is a question in the chat. Does the use of guarantees increase the costs of the project?
Not necessarily. No, I mean, you should use guarantees to help sort of reduce the cost of the project. I mean, it depends on how complex the project, how you want to use the guarantee, how many sort of structuring and lawyers you want to pour. If you've got a nice standardized one that you can take out and apply, then it should. And ultimately, we see guarantees as being used to lower the cost of the project. So that's why they're there. That's why we want to sort of. They should be typically additional, both development and financial. So it really is about helping to lower the price of the project and or the portfolio. I don't know that. Shireen, does that answer your question, or did you want some more clarification there? But thanks for the question. Keep them coming. Keeps me on my toes. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, yeah, no. So I see. How is this impact on the client side? I mean, the guarantee should give them assurances. So, say you're like KfW and you provide a first loss guarantee. You're a triple rated entity, and you're sitting there providing a first loss. Then ultimately that should affect the pricing on the client side. They should be happy and reassured that there's a AAA entity sitting there as a cushion for anything that eventuates, and that they can easily pull that guarantee, so that they know that there's a very reliable, solid partner that sits behind that and can help the project in terms of the. I mean, you can ultimately, if it's like a bond or a loan, you could also have a guarantee that provides credit uplift, but it provides assurance with the institution, not only in terms of their credit rating, which of course gives it, but also in terms of their due diligence and the fact that it's a sort of, they've had their economists, their finance engineers pour over it, whether it's a sort of, let's say, a metro project in Cairo, or it's a desalination plant in Jordan, whatever the type of infrastructure project, or it could be a smaller scale thing, that they see a benefit from that. But thanks for this. And structured funds, so these are like collective investment vehicles. They pool resources and thereby distribute risk across the fund. So this is basically sort of kind of like a equity fund. It's flat structured, which everybody gets the same sort of return and risks and profits, and the capital is divided in tranches with different risk and return profiles depending on the project, but the investors all sort of treated equally. Or it can have these different. So you can have a flat structure, or you can have other types of structures whereby there are different risks and tranches by different investors. So why they're important? I mean, their design allows donors to come together. So depending on my risk profile, I, Pro Parco, might have a very different risk profile to BII or DEG or USDFC. So I'm going to be sitting maybe in a different part of the fund, and I'm going to look at different projects. So that sort of helps bring in donors, but also share risks and helps the fund to perform. So these kind of innovative funds are the bread and butter of this agenda. Thanks. Next slide, please. So this is a bit of an overview of the collective investment vehicle. So as you can see, there's, the kind of amounts invested by sub-region, the instruments used in collective investment vehicles. So we've got various types of credit lines, syndicated loans. We can see the biggest one there, which is investments, and I think that's let me just see that. Yeah, so sorry, direct investment, credit lines, guarantees, and insurance. Yeah, so that's a bit in terms of the instruments that are predominant, but it's quite varied, as you can see. What sectors are we seeing? That is very much banking and business sectors. So you can have a fund that invests in a local financial intermediary that on-lends that money to, for example, entrepreneurs that want to repair bikes, or women that need access to finance in order to build businesses. Whatever the topic area that you want to encourage, you can often use that. So you can go through the local banking system, and then that can on-lend equity injections into the local economy. So, or you can have them directly invest in companies. So it could be medium-sized companies that need equity to develop. So, thanks. Next slide, please. So yeah, Gaia. Some of you have heard of this. Maybe it's a sort of Article 9 fund, and it's got MUFG, the Japanese, the Canadians, and it's a debt fund that's designed to crowd in. So, it's also kind of adaptation. So resilient infrastructure ecosystems, and it basically has a different layer of structure, including a junior tranche with concessional partners, and then it's got this senior piece that's for institutional investors, and a second loss unfunded guarantee of up to 300 million. So you've got kind of quite a few different layers there. You've got the capital, the junior, you've got institutionals, and you've also got an unfunded guarantee. So that is it's really pulling in the money and allowing the private investors to take the bulk of the financing, but development actors are taking a lot of the risk off the table. Next slide, please. Dutch Good Growth Fund. I mean, these are other good examples, and this is a bit linked to the OECD blended finance principles, which I'll speak a bit about later. And this is sort of targeting the missing middle of SMEs that can't get banking access, and they're too big to kind of get other types of maybe funding, but they create jobs, and the investments align with economic development and job creation. Next slide, please, Joanna. So we have the OECD DAC blended finance principles. These are the sort of go-to backbone of what we consider the most effective way to basically understand and deliver blended finance. So we spent a lot of time developing these. They got signed off. They've been used across the G20, G7 to inform this discussion around mobilization. We are happy to say that we have updated the guidance that underpin this. So it's fresh out. It's got lots more in it, and it was great reading. We've also got some private sector. Before, I'll let you know, we had 300 pages of guidance that underpin this. So we thought maybe we would limit that, and we cut it back to 100. So when you're thinking a bit about blending, so these are the sort of guiding rules. First, you've got to think about anchoring it to your development rationale. So what is my development rationale? Well, that should be your first condition. It's to increase mobilization, crowd in, not crowd out. You got to think about the local context. So what's happening in that environment, in that sector, in that area, and that's got to be the project. The blend has to be with that in mind. You need to partner with local partners. So you really want to try and get institutional investors, local partners to participate in the transaction. And you want to make sure you get transparency in data and impact and development. So you've got to be clear on the results. Next slide, please. So this is a bit more depth into principle one. So you've got to drive and maximize outcomes. You've got to define your objectives and expect those results for deploying development finance, and you've got to demonstrate commitment to high quality. So some actors out there are offering blended finance. The OECD DAC offers it, but we want to have very high conditions, and it should be used within this framework. So this is used in the peer learning, peer reviews of our members, and it's also embedded in some of our donors that are actively in this space. Next slide, please. So what do you got to do if you're implementing? Well, you've got to think a bit about the main sectors. You've got to kind of look at the outcome of the risk and the return, and have the skills, are those in place? And does the project basically have a clear blended finance objective? So what are those? Is it aligning to the 2030, the Paris Agreement? What about local priorities? Does the country align with what you're planning? So those are really important, that you've got to look at the regional, local, sub-regional context and make sure that your project is working at a sort of local level. And broader development cooperation strategies is really important. And then does it come up with high standards? Does it have ESG safeguards? Does it have PRI? Is there responsible business conduct practices applied? Does it report? Are there reporting obligations and transparency? Is this clear in the investment cycle? Next slide, please. This is two. So this is really about crowding in. You've got to seek leverage based on context and conditions. You won't be able to leverage in LDCs. The financing system is very thin, and local finance will be very limited. So you've got to seek where it works. So the conditions in social sectors are more challenging. You'll have to maybe use some grants, maybe use some grant gap funding, but also maybe think a bit about the conditions of the market. And so really look at those and think about the instruments, the structures, the concessionality that you're going to use with your blend. To deploy to address market failures. I mean, I would ultimately say that the sort of ability of the world to transition towards sustainability is a bit of a market failure, and that's where blended finance is coming in. But you don't want to overdo it, and you don't want to subsidize the whole private sector in order to achieve this. So it's about making sure that you're pricing it really at the cusp, and that you continue to keep an eye on it, and you've got an exit strategy. And that when you think about refinancing all these other points in a financing transaction life, that you're trying to ultimately exit. Your success is not staying in the project, it is exiting. So that means you've got to focus on that sustainability. So you build those markets and you get out and you do other projects and focus on other things. That's ultimately success. Next slide, please. This is a bit around implementation. So the project ensure development additionality, financial, commercial sustainability. These are points that you should tick off, and have this in mind when you're sort of developing the project, and make sure that you bring this into the development of the portfolio or the structure. And I mean, does it sort of have you got the right policy, sector, investment frameworks developed? Is everything coherent among stakeholders? And how do you ensure? I mean, at the same time, you might be developing a sort of a market failure identified, but you want to develop well-functioning commercial markets at the same time, or not distort anything either. So that's everything you need to in regard to principle 2. 3, support local development priorities and aim local financial market development. We always tend to lend in USD or euros. You want to do things in developing countries at the local level, lend, fund, provide your blend in local currency. That will bring out the local financial actors. Not saying that you can all do all mobilization through local currency, but at the moment it's sort of disproportionate in terms of how much we're using hard currency versus local currency. And you've got to use finance alongside efforts to promote a sound enabling environment. So you really got to make sure that you have that framework in governments, in ministries, regulators working. Next slide, please. This is just a bit more. I mean, we can share the slides with you. And there's a lot more detail. In the interest of time, I will move on to the next one. Thanks very much, Tawana. And so here we want to really work about partnering. You've got to have each party to engage on the basis of their mandate while respecting the others. So I've got a part, I'm trying to create development, the private sector is trying to make money. How do I get those two working together? So I've got a mandate, they've got a mandate to make commercial returns, but we've got to kind of come and create this a win-win. And also you've got to think about targeting your risks, and you don't want to overtake your risks, but at the same time in blended finance, you don't want to have no risks at all. Otherwise, you're ultimately crowding out the market. So it's finding that sweet spot between being financially additional, but not being over generous with your concessionality or your instrumental structure. And ultimately, we all want this to grow, to scale. So it is a bit about making sure that we grow this. We know the needs. And at the moment, it's 70 billion. It sounds like a lot, but for the needs of developing country, it's a sort of drop in the ocean. Next slide, please. Again, I'm going to sort of kind of move through this and then just go to principle 5. We love this one at the OECD. We should have had it at principle 1, but well, it didn't make sense. But this is all about data, evidence, and you've got to really agree on the performance and result metrics from the start. You should also track your financial flows and make sure that they're kind of providing development results, and also signal the financing data so that you can build market performance. There's a massive issue in developing countries, in particular sub-Saharan Africa, where they're all overpaying for their credit that's provided by donors, DFIs, NDBs, but in particular the private sector. And we need to ensure that we can try and provide more data, more information to the market, including the development finance market, to allow them to be more effective in the lending and guarantees or equity that's provided that's closer to the realities on the ground. Because at the moment, I mean, we're worried a lot about debt sustainability and sort of adding credit to developing countries. Even the interest of transition is got to be a sort of or sustainability, a balancing act. So the more information that's available, the more transparency, this helps this issue. And so you've got to also think about development and think about having resources to monitor and evaluate the projects. And you've got to have accountability for blended finance operations. Ultimately, this is public money, taxpayers' money that's in these projects. So we need to account for it, be clear on its use, and ultimately try and get as much out of it as possible while ensuring the highest development standards. So that means that we've got to be transparent about it. This is more detail. Thanks for this, Tawana. I'll move through this slide. Okay, so that's a bit on the principles. Now I'm going to tell you a bit about green social sustainability and sustainability-linked bonds. We like them. The markets generally, in terms of developing countries, hasn't had the same success as in developed. But you can see there the bond market is humongous. In relation to the financing gap, yeah, I mean that's sort of like 3% of the global bond market, and then we get to what's actually happening. What's happening in terms of issuances, and 5.1 billion is not enough to address this 4 trillion. So we want to see more, but at the same time recognizing there's debt sustainability. Stefan, over to you. I can see you've got your hand up.
Thanks. Isn't the 140 trillion the current size, and the 4 trillion, is that an absolute or an annual requirement, the 4 trillion for the gap?
Yeah,
I would rather say it's not, it's like comparing apples to bananas, right?
Yeah. I mean, the 140 trillion is the global current market size, but I mean, bond markets do sort of last generally 10 years, and so the size probably won't. And there's lots of things kind of ongoing in the market. So, I mean, you're right. It is a bit apples and pears, but we needed to find something to kind of compare. I don't know if you've got other ideas on sort of articulating this comparison. This is what we've looked at in terms of trying to sort of unfold it. And a bond will normally have a life of sort of, okay, it depends on the issuances, but 10 or 7 years, or is the US sort of bond market rate is based on the 10-year one. So, and this 4 trillion is based on the 2030 agenda. So it is, yeah, you're right. It's not scientific. It is a bit, but the figure here you see on the global bond market and the GSSS bond market, those two are comparable, because that's what was issuances in 20. If you see the sort of notes underneath, that's the figure in 2023, and that's the. I mean, the dates are slightly off, but that's
okay.
2020. Yeah.
Thanks. That helps.
But good point. Thanks for this. Thanks for clarifying this, and thanks for pointing that out. I can make a bit more of a clarification on that. Appreciate it. So yeah, so it is anyway. But to Stefan's point, it's yeah, there are nuances in the market, and but we still think that the gaps are massive, and GSSS bonds can help. So what have we been doing on this at the OECD? And maybe we can go to the next slide. So we've been looking a bit at the sort of category of it and how it's been evolving. You can see green is the predominant. We want to see more of the social and the sustainable growing. It's still kind of pretty flat, and we've had a few years where it's dropped there. You can see during COVID, and that the market was a bit impacted. We're seeing a bit of a pickup now again, and yeah, we want to see more social and sustainable bonds, and we hope that will be based on some of the criteria and taxonomies that we've seen in the green bond space that can be used in these more social. But you do see projects now, for example, one in Kenya. So it's a social project because it was housing accommodation for students. The building that houses them is green. So it's got solar panels, all the water is reused. So it had a social green bond, came together, listed on the London Stock Exchange and on the Nairobi Exchange. So it could combine those two. That's what I think we need to see more of, those types of projects that can allow that to happen. But if we can go to the next slide, please. So what's the difference between GSS and the other ones, SLBs? They're tied. So when you issue a GSSS bond, it's tied to the project. So the bond is directly related to, let's say, the Cairo underground. The funding of the tunnels and the infrastructure is linked to the bond, and the performance of the asset will link to the bond and the coupon payments of the bond. So there's a direct relationship between the asset or the underlying project to the bond. On this right, SLBs, those are fungible. So they are not directly linked to projects, but they're linked to KPIs. So you can have a SLB, and that means that you could have projects, much larger projects, tied to an SLB. And just to let you know that, for example, Chile does half its sovereign bond issuance in sustainability-linked bonds. That's also partly because the country's got quite a lot of water, hydro, and others, but it can basically say, we commit to reducing our carbon by 2030, and this is the bond is going to have that as a KPI. So if we don't hit that KPI, then we, at certain points in the life cycle of the bond, then we pay more. If we do hit it, you can have some bonds have a step down, so I pay less as an issuer. So those are the sort of different instruments available in the market at the moment. We would like to see SLBs grow, probably for GSSS bonds with some of the debt conditions in developing countries. It's better to have them tied to underlying assets so that it's easier to monitor and also ensure that they're being used for those and not fungible with other plain vanilla bonds that and SLBs that could be used for other things and contribute to debt sustainability. But we will do some work at the OECD on this and bring this up, and happy if anybody's got any views or thoughts on this to also bring that to our attention. So why we like SLBs, because they can scale and that you can have quite strong KPIs. Uruguay's got one where they're saying we're going to have half our car fleet, well, something like 30% of our car fleet you can come up with, or they've got things on their KPIs around biodiversity, forestry as well, which sort of holds governments to account. So interesting structures and things that are happening out there. Next slide, please. So use of proceeds. They can, I've spoken a bit about this, the transparency, reputational, from an investor, they like them. I think investors are a bit more less, they seem to less like SLBs at the moment. And from an issuer, so from a government or corporate, they can diversify your investor base. So you can have new investors coming in. It's good for your reputation, aligns you with Paris, and allows you to have often deeper pools of institutional capital coming in. So the likes of PIMCO, others that want to come into sustainability. Pricing, when you issue, you have bidders for the bond. In the past, we've had too much demand and not enough supply for these types of bonds. So there's been a greenium, which means a pricing benefit for the issuer, either the sovereign or the corporate, meaning I'm getting my bond at a cheaper price than I would if it was a plain vanilla offered on that day under exactly the same conditions. But because I've got sustainability, I have a minor pricing, but it can be significant over the life of a bond. We're seeing less of that now because there's more in the market and for a variety of other reasons. But very interesting to sort of see these response to that. next slide, please. By the way, that dot in the middle of Africa should be a lot smaller. That's 3.2 billion. And sub-Saharan Africa, it's 4.6. So very small. The regions where we're seeing the biggest SDGs, the need for transition, the sort of massive financing needs are very small. And most of the GSSS bonds is dominated by Europe and Asia. We have seen quite a lot in Latin America, though, recently. Quite a few issuances there. Next slide. SLBs, they're forward-looking, so they're trying to have a target date. As I've said, I hit my target, coupon step up. If I hit my target, coupon step down. If I didn't, step up. So that means that, as I said, you as the investor in the bond will have to pay. You lose if the coupon steps down, and if the coupon steps up, you win. So it's it is a bit funny because the investor doesn't benefit when there's success, which is one of the sort of criticisms of the SLBs. But for the issuer, which is the government often, or the corporate, they're working towards these efforts. And Eni was the Italian utility was the first to issue these, and then there's been a few increasingly sovereigns that are issuing them. Next slide, please. SLBs, mainly in the European market and Central Asia, and sort of very limited elsewhere, really tiny amounts in relation to the overall bond market. Next slide, please. So this was a bit, we did some stuff on Sukuk for the Middle Eastern market, and this is sort of an interesting area. Next slide, please. That we've done. So they're complementary. So you can have GSSS bonds and SLBs working together, and they can help your capital market development, local currency, but it does depend a bit on your institutional setting. So if you've got very high debt sustainability levels, no, I don't think it's a good idea. If you've got a very low credit rating, then you should have your assets linked to you should think about hard currency, issuing in those in hard currency and have them as GSSS bonds. If you've got other things that capital markets are highly developed, then you can sort of look to developing local currency, and you can have things like you don't have a pipeline of assets, which is the case with lots of small countries like Belize, and we've seen it in some of these others. They don't have enough assets in their country, but they've got lots of forests, lots of nature, like the Congo and others, but they want to keep those and they want to keep growing. So then you can use an SLB to encourage yourself and fund those initiatives and get the private sector to be part of it, so that you sort of manage your mangroves, manage your sustainable assets effectively. Next slide, please. So at the OECD, we developed frameworks for developing countries and issuers. These are some of the challenges that we look to sort of address in developing countries. First off, debt. Always first thing you've got to think about, how much exposure do I have? How much have I already got on the out there? And as I said, I mean, at the moment, we've got some horrendous stories of interest payments taking up like a quarter of budgets alongside education and healthcare. So this has really got to be first and center of your mind. Weak financial markets. that creates further problems. So it's not only a rating, but also what your market has in terms of regulators, systems in place that allow you to use capital markets. You need technical capacity, so you need people in the Ministry of Environment, the Debt Management Office, ability to issue these things, talk the language, understand the legal documentation, and put things out into the market with credible frameworks. You need projects. So depending on the type of project you're going to issue, you need serious KPIs and somebody serious to monitor them. So with poor and data and limited availability, then you've got to be careful and choose carefully your KPIs. They're material and ambitious and comparable if you're doing SLBs. You've got to think about standards and taxonomies, and you really need to think about your investor base, targeting those with a preference for ESG debt, and those that have a weak reporting. I mean, typically in developing countries, you've got a very small group of sort of investors that buy sovereign bonds. You need to widen that. They might not care or be interested in ESG. So it is about widening your investor base that improves the yield of your overall investments and thereby encourages and you're less exposed to the fluctuations of market dynamics, and it allows you to sort of bring in those that want to encourage sustainability and tend to be a bit longer term. Next slide, please. So what are the risks in terms of GSSS bonds? The donors, there's a problem with credibility. If you help to issue a bond by providing a guarantee or something like that, you might be considered to contributing to debt levels. Not many donors have a sort of strong understanding of SLBs, particularly these new structures. Sophistication of data and don't want to be associated with a sort of market reputational questions with a bond that goes into default or is greenwashing or others. But the opportunities are massive. So to align your investments with ESG, encouraging transparency, tapping into the global bond markets and size, and then also working with countries' financing needs and debt levels as well. So you can use this work with developing countries as donors and considerable market size and growing. So yeah, next slide, please. So how can we support these instruments? Well, there's instruments from blended finance, so guarantees. There's technical assistance. There's other there's types of insurance projects. There's market building. There's capacity building. So there's a whole range of things that donors can do to help issuances. You can also be an anchor investor, which we've seen the World Bank do. So picking up the bond after it's been issued into the market. You can help in terms of the interoperability and comparability, ensure that the right standards and taxonomies are used, and then coordinate, work together, because this is something that affects more at the macro sovereign level. And so it is important about donors coming together around something as big as the sort of bond market and working on solutions together to support specific sectors or regions. Next slide, please. So we have these number of areas. We call them the 5 I's. So you can have, as I said, investment, the first loss anchor. You can convene, and you can have partial guarantees, political risk insurance to support the bond market, technical assistance. There's also the infrastructure, which I didn't mention, and regulation. So helping agencies that are relevant to the bond market, encouraging them to go into the sort of GSSS space. Impact is critical for investors. They really want to know if they're going to go into this space, and buy these types of bonds. They really want to know what's happening inside the financing, what the project is actually doing, what the bond's funding. So having second-party opinion providers really give credible overviews of bonds, whether they're tied to underlying assets or SLBs, is critical to credibility, and therefore future issuances and the broader growth of the thematic green, social, sustainable market that is critically important to development. Next slide, please. So yeah, if you just keep clicking, it should sort of come out. Yeah, so this is Rwanda. They did a smaller one. I mentioned this. It was in local currency. It had the World Bank providing us credit enhancement and also technical assistance. So it was, I mean, we see it like this in terms of that it's going to basically increase funding to women-led projects and put in place ESG practices in financing institutions. So very nice in terms of what it's got in regards to KPI. So that's what's got the bonds got to sort of live up to, but also as a pilot to send a message to market participants. And maybe we will have a second issuance at a bigger level from the sovereign in terms of issuing something much more sizable. Next slide, please. These are the reports. I encourage you to read them if you want to know more about how donors, you can benefit from GSSS bonds. If you want to know about some of the risks and downside to GSSS bonds, they're all there. So I think we try and provide a sort of evidence base in regard to their use and practicality. They're not the silver bullet that's going to solve everything, but they can be an important part of a financing transition conversation, and that donors currently don't do as probably much as they could in this space. Next slide. Yeah, so next slide. I think this is one of my old slide decks. No, that's fine. So I think that was pretty much it in terms of the presentation. This was from the other. So yeah, I don't know if there's any questions. We apologies we didn't have my latest version. I'll make sure that we have that for the real thing in Paris. Thanks for Tawana for pushing that finger quite a few times. And thanks for the questions and for the interest and just, I mean, I'd also like your feedback if there's anything that I can develop further, clarify, improve, or if you've got questions to any of the slides, anything else that you want to sort of raise at this stage. But maybe back to you, Tawana, or Elodie. I don't know if there's...
Sure. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for covering all these aspects. As we quickly introduced in the beginning, this session is to give you a common background, so everyone has ideas on the definitions, on the concepts, and what is blended finance after all, because each institution might have a different definition, right? So I see that most of the participants that are connected here will be participating to the in-person training week, but for those that are not, and this might be your last chance to ask questions to Paul, so do not hesitate. We have scheduled for 2 hours because it was 1.5 hours of Paul's presentation, and then we wanted to leave some time to Q&A, but if there are no questions, we could also close the session, but I'll leave you a few seconds to think of it. And also thank you, Paul, for giving us the links to all the publications. We will briefly, after this session, send you the slide decks and also the registration.
Any questions? Was it crystal clear? Shall I do the same presentation in Paris, or are there other elements that you would like me to expand upon? Or is there any questions on the blended finance data description that we've got at the OECD, or any of the case studies? And I can provide more case studies as well, but I'm open to criticism, questions, solutions, or anything you want to raise. I know we had 2 hours and we're coming up to sort of an hour and 40. But if there are any hands, or if you're sort of tired of hearing about blended finance for a while after this hour and 40 minutes, then I can also understand that.
Yes, and also this is a good opportunity for us to take the temperature and to see how is the level. Is it too complicated, too easy? Would you like to focus on some sectors? Of course, we'll be focusing on the energy, but are there any questions regarding the principles, maybe, or the case studies? Feel free to be completely honest and jump in on your expectations to the training. It might be your last chance to intervene. And also, you cover on currency. There will be a session with a TCX here during the in-person training, where they will cover the currency risk as well. If some of you are wondering or interested about this topic.
Yeah, I mean, also thanks to Anna for that. And just say, I mean, I did spend quite a lot of time on the GSSS bonds. That's a sort of growing area for us, but we can also focus a bit on some of the elements of other instruments as well. But this is guarantees, and GSSS bonds are where we're seeing a lot of interest and growth from donors. Not enough, but significant growth on the GSSS bonds, and a lot of interest around the guarantees, as I said.
Great, thanks. Well, if there are no hands, then I guess that we can close here. And unless Elodie wants to say anything, just want to thank you very much, everyone's participation, and see you soon in Paris.